Welcome to Cultural Fluency Makers. I'm your host, David Wellish. Each week, we welcome leaders to share how they stay ahead of the ever-changing consumer landscape. With today's cultural transformation, top brands need to understand diverse consumer segments from Gen Z, Hispanic, and LGBTQ+ to gamers, wine enthusiasts, and basketball fanatics in Iowa. Their marketing strategies require them to keep the pulse on their consumers, but also their brand in the category to continue to grow revenue for the long term. Cultural Fluency Makers is sponsored by Collage Group, the only cultural intelligence engine that provides brand and consumer insights on the why that drives consumer behavior and purchase decisions. Let's get started. I am so excited for this episode and look forward to a dynamic and insightful dialogue on this Friday afternoon. I am excited to speak with somebody who is not only culturally savvy, but also a strategic thinker with a proven knack for driving strong business results through creative problem solving. She's a strategic marketer, a brand growth specialist, and a culturally resonant campaign architect. Her ability to blend creativity with data-driven insights, along with her calm and collaborative demeanor, makes her an incredibly inspiring individual to learn from. She currently serves as the head of Global Brands Refreshment Categories at Mondelez International. Lauren Flanigan, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, David. That's such a generous introduction. I really appreciate it.
It's so great to be with you. All right, let's go deep. Let's go deep together. Lauren, given America's rapidly changing demographic and cultural landscape, but in the context of today's political landscape, what role do you think inclusive marketing sort of plays in your overall marketing approach?
Yeah. It's a great question and a super timely, very relevant one at that. To your point, there is quite a lot happening in the news cycle around this topic. So, I think the US is really remarkable in a lot of ways, and especially in the sense that we have such a diverse country. We have a really diverse consumer base when you're thinking about brand building, you're thinking about businesses. There are so many different groups of folks out there, whether it's race or ability or gender or sexuality or religion. We are a really diverse nation, and that's been something that's been such a strength for us for many years. So when I think about inclusive marketing, to me, it is not just a nice to have. It really is table stakes. You have to have inclusive marketing when there's such a diverse set of consumers that you're speaking to. And beyond that, I think that it really is at this point the expectation. And it really is table stakes. This is what consumers are expecting. And it isn't just a nice to have or something that you're doing as a favor or as charity, but it really just makes good business sense. I think consumers are expecting to see themselves represented by media and brands, but it also goes really beyond just representation in terms of advertising. So it's great to see Black people, people of color, women all represented across ads, but it really should go beyond that. We should continue doing that, let's be clear. But it really goes beyond just advertising representation. It's about representing consumers at everything from activation to building the products together. So consumer co-creation and really ensuring that you're finding ways to connect and resonate in culture is truly what inclusive marketing means to me. So I think when that connection is genuine, it then also just becomes a part of a really strong business strategy. And when I think about examples of companies who have done this well, Nike, for example, released the shoe, I think it was called Fly Ease. And it's a shoe that is meant to be able to put on easier if you have a physical disability that makes it difficult for you to bend down and tie your shoe or bend down and, kind of stuff it on your foot. So I think it's a great example of when you're speaking to the inclusive nature of all of the folks who are out there across every spectrum and intersection of life, when you make it a point to speak to them, it also becomes good business strategy. So the Fly issue is something that Nike co-created with folks who have disabilities. And it really took off. It was a super viral product launch, really successful for them with the intended audience, but also it really caught on in culture as a whole. So to me, inclusive marketing is at this point table stakes and also just good business sense.
That's great, Lauren, and I love that example. I mean, that would tell us it's not just advertising, right? I mean, it's really thinking about your consumers in a very holistic way, which is great. How how important is it? I mean, from a business perspective, how important do you think it is for consumer organizations to get this right? Like, can consumer mass products grow without getting this right?
I think you can grow within the limits of who you're speaking to. So I think that it's limiting to not think about the holistic nature of consumer bases across different intersections and planes. And I think that we're seeing this play out in real time. There's a number of brands who have been a part of the conversation lately, and many who have come under fire who consumers feel haven't gotten it right. And I think if you're in CPG, it's kind of inevitable that you are seeing, a certain big red retailer really face the $1 billion+ impact of when consumers feel that it isn't done right. So I think it is absolutely critical for businesses to do it well and to do it with authenticity. And especially now, consumers, especially young ones, really do vote with their wallets. So when you're not getting it right, you physically will see that translate into your P&L. You'll see that impact hit there as well. So I definitely think it's critical and absolutely important to get it right across all of the ways that you're implementing inclusive marketing.
So, Lauren, as you say, the bar is high, especially Gen Zers. They keep us on our toes. It's interesting. Collage did very recently a piece of research where we said, what is the impact on consumer behavior in terms of those companies that are publicly announcing the pullbacks? And it's astounding. I think it's a third of consumers have already changed their own behaviors away from those companies. I mean, it's a fascinating. What's hard? I mean, you look at the demographics, and it would seem like it'd be like a 101. Like and as great marketers, we would know how to do this. What's hard? What are the key challenges here?
Yeah. It's a great question, and I would add to the last conversation that it is the P&L impact in terms of folks voting with their wallets and no longer supporting the business, but it's also the longer term impact of reputation, and that's typically a thing that's much harder to build back and also more difficult to measure, but very expensive to correct. So when I think about what's hard about this and where are the pitfalls, where are kind of the stumbling blocks, I would kind of bucket it into three spaces. I would say consistency, authenticity, and then leadership buy-in. And by consistency, I mean that it's a rare thing when you have, a life cycle of a brand that is lived out by just one generation of marketers. Like typically, one leadership theory may be relevant one day and a different one the next if there is a shift in leadership or team. So that consistency when you are planning brands and you are speaking out on things, I think can be really important if you don't have a succession who is able to carry that on with consistency. And I think it relates to the point on authenticity as well. So if you've started a conversation, then be mindful of being committed to that. So enter conversations with intentionality and an intent to commit so that it lands with authenticity. Um, and when I think about that, I think about the relationship aspect with the communities as well. So it's authenticity in the form of being a part of the conversation, but also not being a part of the conversation in a way that feels opportunistic, but really doing it in a way that drives support. So Oreo is a good example of this. Oreo has supported Pride for many, many years, and really before it was trendy for brands and retailers to do it. So it feels authentic for Oreo to show up around Pride and to produce Pride campaigns. But it's also that Oreo isn't speaking to the LGBTQ plus community only in Pride. There's that longer term relationship that makes it feel really authentic. And I think when that's done in an example where it feels more opportunistic and it doesn't feel done well is Old Navy some years ago. So if you remember, right after the murder of George Floyd, Juneteenth started to be recognized at a more national level. And a lot of folks wanted to jump on that bandwagon and quickly commercialize the holiday. And Old Navy was one that really stood out to me during that time. I remember they had launched a Juneteenth clothing line, and it did not resonate well with the community at all and very quickly received a lot of backlash because there wasn't that authenticity there. It felt like just bandwagoning on a part of a conversation without having really been a part of supporting the community before. So I think those are two good opposite examples of when the authenticity is there and it doesn't feel opportunistic, but it feels a part of the community, like the Oreo and Pride example, versus when it feels opportunistic and it doesn't feel like an authentic relationship is being built. I think that's where you see pitfalls. And then lastly, I'd say leadership buy-in can be a pitfall, but it can also just be difficult for marketers to be able to achieve to get into some of the more inclusive marketing spaces. And I think that that comes just from the fact that you have a lot of leaders who want to protect the business, and ultimately that can sometimes make folks a bit more risk averse. And the topic can sometimes be polarizing, so it's something that people may want to avoid. But I think when you have that hesitancy from leadership, that's natural. I think you then come with the data, come with the facts, maybe find a way to dip your toe into the space first and have some proof points that are a little bit less risky. So how can you de-risk de-risk the perceived risk with data and maybe some test and learns to build your plan from there?
So eloquently said, Lauren. Thank you. Those are three absolutely, I agree with you. We've seen it across the board. We see the impact of inconsistency. We see the impact of here, let's be opportunistic. The third one I find very interesting because we have seen that being a really important predictor of success. What do you think? Ultimately, everybody wants growth, and ultimately, everybody's chasing shareholder value and profitability and top line growth. In these segments it wouldn't seem too hard to make the case,
Mm.
to make the business case. Um, but it's in some companies it's not easy,
Mhm.
and one is continuously evangelizing. It's a never ending evangelizing exercise in some cases. Like what's getting in the way? I think you had some good ideas in terms of, the data points, but what's the root cause? Why do you think it's, I got some hypotheses and, I'd love to just hear your thoughts. Why is it that hard?
Yeah. It's a good question, and I think it really just goes back to risk averse, wanting to feel comfortable with what feels unpolarizing, what feels easy, honestly. And I think that that is where the difficulty is, and it's not all leaders, right? Like some leaders have more of that appetite, get the business case, are really gung ho. Like I've had the privilege of working with leaders who embody that, who really are very, understanding of the fact that sure, it's a great thing to do to have people represented, but it simply is just good business strategy as well. So I think that some leaders do get that a bit more inherently and have a bigger appetite for doing bolder, bigger things, but some can just be a bit more risk averse, don't want to rock the boat, or might be worried that the conversation will turn political and that can get the company into some issues. So I think that's mostly where it stems from. And I think that there's also a need to continually remind businesses that it is a business competitive advantage to be able to do these things and it's not charity work, I think is kind of the difference as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. So I've had the privilege of moderating many CMO roundtables during the last year plus, and we asked the question about cultural relevance. And so that, we say, how important, how essential is for brands to be culturally relevant today if you want to win consumers' hearts and minds. And the answer is always, oh my gosh, it's like absolutely a necessity. Being culturally relevant is really, really important. How do you define cultural relevance, or what Collage defines as cultural fluency? And like, what does it mean for you, and how do you become it in the marketplace?
I love that question. And I love just kind of like the connection back to the advantage that I think cultural relevance does have. And I agree with that. Like I definitely think if you look at some of the strongest brands, in particular, some of the brands that are most beloved by Gen Z, for example, they're brands that play in culture. They have a lot of relevance and a lot of connection. And they're not just, jumping on a cultural bandwagon, they're active participants in it. And I think that that really does a lot to build brand love and just interest in the brand over time. So I definitely agree with that. Some of the strongest brands are active participants in culture. And I think being a brand that is a part of culture really is a competitive advantage as well. If you can play in culture well, you have a stronger brand, you have more connection to the community. But to be able to do that, you have to be fluent in the community and you have to kind of understand what's relevant to the folks that you're trying to connect with. So for me, I think about cultural fluency as being more than just showing up in the right spaces or the right times or the right conversations, but it's really about understanding the nuances and the values and the rituals of different communities and ensuring that the brand storytelling feels organic and authentic in that space. And making sure that you're showing up in a way that doesn't feel opportunistic or bandwagoning, but that you have been there, you've been a part of the conversation. So it's finding the values of the community that you're wanting to connect with and being able to support that. So for me, for example, in my career, I think about a good example with gluten-free Oreo. So we launched gluten-free. I had the privilege of being able to work on that in maybe about 2021 or so. And it was an interesting time for gluten-free where you really had a lot of smaller, more niche players that were owning the gluten-free space. And there hadn't been a big brand to come in and really shake it up until Oreo. But what was interesting about that was it was a space where we didn't really have a lot of natural credibility with that community. There was a lot of hesitancy of whether a big company could truly be gluten free. And gluten free is an important thing to land because, of course, for some people, it's perceived as a diet or kind of a nice to have. But for many people, or for people who are, celiac, for example, it is really a health concern. So it's important to know that they can trust this perceived big brand that's coming into the space. So I think it's a good example of a place where we didn't have a lot of credibility with the community. We weren't really there before, and we needed to really land a message of authenticity. So when you think about cultural relevance, cultural fluency, if you don't have it, how do you build it? So it's looking to have the right partners to help build that with you in the space. So with the gluten-free example, we worked with content creators who were a part of the community to help get the message out, to try the product, and to build that relationship with that group. So it's really also about having an awareness of where you might not have that and how do you start to build it. I think another example is now in my current responsibility, I have global responsibility across my brands, and cultural fluency has taken on a completely different meaning in this space where I now have brands that exist across the globe from the US to Spain, Latin America, China, South Africa, Turkey, and many others. Cultural fluency means something very different in this context. So when I'm thinking about global brand plans, it's having an understanding of the cultural nuances that might be really relevant as I'm building brand strategy. And I think that that also means having a sense of humility. There are things that I naturally may not know as an American who is, designing strategy across all of these regions. It's about having the humility to understand that I also need to surround myself with the right team in the same sense that I am looking for content creators to help me land a message about gluten free. How am I thinking about ensuring that my messaging is going to be relevant with Spanish speakers in Argentina or Gen Zs in Turkey? So I think all in all, what I would say is cultural relevance, definitely a competitive strategy for brands. To do it well, you have to be culturally fluent. And to be culturally fluent, you have to acknowledge your gaps where you may or may not know something. You might need a partner to help land the message in a way that you can do better. And also surrounding yourself with team members who have those strengths and the understanding as well that you may not.
Lauren, what a great perspective, and what a fun role.
Yeah.
The global perspective. As an as a as an Ecuadorian immigrant, I love that. It's a great role. What role from your perspective does insights play in order to get this right?
That's a great question. I think insights really are the right hand for all marketers, and having the data to understand better who you're speaking to matters a lot. And I think it is a big deciding factor in whether or not you land the message authentically, and whether or not your plans are solving a relevant problem. So I definitely think insights is the right hand to all of this, and it really is the foundation and the starting point for anything you're doing should start with the data.
Yeah, obviously that's what, being a consumer intelligence and a cultural intelligence company, we support that. Going back to the DI space, there's obviously, and you mentioned there's a lot happening with pullbacks, and I think it's having a pretty deep impact in the HR space. Do you feel like that's transcending to the media and advertising side of things, or is it are they two separate worlds?
It's a good question. And it really is a shame that it's really kind of become a polarized topic, but it's the reality. And I think as a consequence, you have a lot of companies who are honestly afraid of DEI because there's this fear of the backlash, whether it be consumer or whether it be political or legislative, regulatory, so on and so forth. I think there's a lot of trepidation around the topic. Um, and when I think about DEI, when folks ask me kind of like my opinion on it, I liken it to thinking about this in terms of everyday things. So think about it in terms of soccer. Like, would you rather bet on a team made up of only goalies? Or would you rather bet on a team where each player has a background that is relevant to all of their required positions? So I would assume most people would probably prefer to bet on the latter. Like having that diversity of experience and skills and backgrounds makes for a stronger team. So all that to say that I do think there's a growing trepidation within DEI. I think that it will impact HR first, but I do think that there will be some broader impact in other spaces of business. But I do think, using the soccer analogy, that it will be a short-term impact because it is clear that when we have this diversity of consumers that we are speaking to across the spectrum, when we have a diversity of talent, whether it's a Spanish speaker on my team that is helping me to understand cultural relevance and fluency in markets that I'm not originally from, or whether it is designing new shoes like Nike with the Fly Ease, I think ultimately it will become evident that these are just business strategies that are required. And I think we're seeing that play out again in real time with some of the retailers we spoke about who are feeling this impact now. So I do think that it will be an impact that will go beyond HR, but I do think it will be a quick realization that a winning team is probably a team made up of more than goalies.
I can visualize that analogy. I mean, it's such a great analogy. Thank you for that. Again, that feels like a campaign. That is, I love that. And so as we finish with the section around the business, how could we do this and not talk about AI? And so, the question is, both what is Mondelez doing in the space, and what do you think its role will be both in the intelligence and insight space as well as the marketing space?
It's a good question, and it's such a fun topic for marketers right now, right? But no, seriously, I think that it is a cool opportunity. I do feel there's a lot of hesitation or fear or concern from marketers about what AI will do in the space. But I do think that it's something that we should embrace as marketers across insights, across marketing. There's a lot of opportunity there. And I think Mondelez is doing a good job of finding new ways to leverage AI. So there's a lot of conversations about the impact from consumer research. For example, I think there's a lot of opportunity to make consumer research even more efficient. So thinking about things like building AI brains with consumer profiles that match your target and being able to ask them questions over time and have that iterative nature and that continuity where the brain is kind of building on what you have been talking to it about before, I think is a really interesting thing that we really haven't had, with the exception of some long-term studies, the ability to do efficiently and cost effectively with consumers before. So I think that's a good example, as well as data synthesis. I mean, I feel like every year, marketers are asking questions that were probably even asked 10 years ago. So having that data synthesis where things are living and are able to go back and understand if the research has been done before and how you can synthesize it with new learnings, I think is a great opportunity with AI as well. And then I think there's tons of applications in other parts of marketing also. So concept generation and brainstorming. I personally use Chat GPT if I'm thinking of ideas, whether it's my personal life or volunteer activities, and just or looking for ideas of what I want to post on TikTok or a caption I need for Instagram. So I think it plays this role or has the potential to play a role of being a sparring partner and being a part of ideation sessions, for example, if you're looking at new innovations or trying to come up with campaign concepts. So I think that it's a great opportunity across all of those. And ultimately, I know the more obvious one, and looking at Coca-Cola, for example, they had their AI created holiday campaign that was AI produced. Obviously, that's something that can be done as well. I do think that we are, it's going to be an interesting one to watch, and I'm curious to see how that plays out, to feel still human and to still have some of the magic of non-AI produced ads as well. So I'm interested to see how that turns out. But I think there's tons of opportunity. I do think that there's also watch outs with AI, especially in marketing, and ensuring that it's used responsibly. From a representation perspective, for example, you have to be mindful of the fact that AI is going to be a reflection of the folks who are programming it. So ensuring that there's responsibility in that front, especially if you're using AI to create human generations or AI created people that are used in campaigns, making sure that there's representation in that front, but also that we're not perpetuating any potentially harmful stereotypes as we build out these tools and capabilities as well. So tons of opportunity that I'm super excited about with AI, but also keeping an eye on how we ensure that the ethics of it is still top of mind as well.
So beautifully said. It is such a striking balance, and you have to lean in, I guess, cautiously. I remember I worked at AOL for many, many years back in the day. And this is when social media began to explode. And I remember the discussion was, I don't know that users will want advertising linked to their, user generated content. And obviously that's history showed us. And so things move pretty fast. It's also interesting, I guess you were, that there's a dichotomy or paradox or different polarized views on the idea of using synthetic personas from a research standpoint. It's a huge, I think, opportunity, and it'd be very interesting to really test it out. To see is it how predictable is it? But yeah, so much room for innovation. All right, so we've learned from you, and we're very grateful for it. And now we're going to spend a few minutes learning about you. And so, maybe starting with what's your source of inspiration and motivation? What inspires you?
I love that question. It's a really good question. I kind of think about it in two ways. I think about it in the sense of my work and my brands, and then ultimately my own kind of like personal life mission of what inspires me. And I think my North Star of me as a person, what inspires me is probably my family and my community. So that sense of connection to the sacrifices that my parents and their parents made, for me to be at this point is definitely something that inspires me, and pass the torch inspiration of what will the next generation then have to build on is something that inspires me. And community building, and also hopefully being an inspiration to future generations of marketers, is something that inspires me quite a lot as well. And then in terms of my work, I think culture is what inspires me. So, I probably spend maybe too much time on TikTok, but I think just, being immersed in what's going on in pop culture is always a source of inspiration for me as I think about new ideas or, new spaces. I get a lot of inspiration from food as well. So, looking at different food scenes in different cities, I think gives me a lot of inspiration for even like product innovation, so on and so forth. So, I would say feeling grounded and connected to culture and really being a part of my community and being close to my family are things that inspire me.
I love that, and they're
They
linked,
are.
right? There's actually a strong linkage there, and I would, like you, I'm also very inspired by culture, and I think it's absolutely rich in texture and fascinating. And if you could travel back in time and give your 20-year-old self some good advice, what would that be? This is for the young
Oh
audience.
my gosh, to just relax. That would definitely be it, that it all works out somehow in the end. It's important to work hard, important to have plans, but also just trust the process, as you go along, and trust yourself more is also something I would say.
Lauren, I think the audience will, at this point in time where there's so much anxiety for so many probably good reasons, I think that this is such a timely and relevant message to the audience. So thank you. Well, this is the end of our session together, and I couldn't be more thankful. Thank you so much for your. I mean, you were so eloquent, and you've given us so much wisdom from a marketing standpoint, some kernels knowledge and wisdom. And so thank you very much for giving us this Friday little slice of your Friday afternoon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It was great to just have the conversation and really appreciate your time. So really happy to have been here with you.
Thank you again. And this has been another exciting episode of Cultural Fluency Makers. See you next time. That's a wrap on another episode of Cultural Fluency Makers. Thank you for joining us. Please share your comments and what you would like to hear more about. Be as specific as possible. For show notes and more, please visit culturalfluencymakers.com. This show is proudly sponsored by Collage Group, unleashing the power of cultural intelligence to fuel brand growth. Please follow Collage Group on LinkedIn, and we will see you next week.